Now, in the ongoing struggles for better leadership and governance, fighting corruption and bringing our leaders to accountability, our state has become a battlefield, and our streets can tell a story no man can. And this is just not for the men and the women of our nation, but it has transversed the whole nation, and people are crying. Welcome to another episode at Speak Up Africa, where we bring you conversations that inform, engage, and empower. And today we have a conversation that I believe is fundamental to most of us, because if you're not a victim, then you're on the other side of this spade. And where is that? And with me, I have Danish in our podcast today. Danish.
Yeah.
Karibu
Prefer
sana.
Odongo, actually.
Odongo.
Yes.
Fantastic. So
Yeah.
tell us what you prefer.
How do you mean what I prefer? My
Your name.
No, my name
Introduce
is
yourself.
Odongo, because Odongo has a deeper meaning. You know, it's cultural, and I'm a journalist, and a really good writer. I think so. So I write on a platform called danishodongo.africa. And I run a nonprofit called the Wellness Tribe. The Wellness Tribe, our primary focus is to think about how do we reform structures, systems, and individual spaces so that we can promote holistic wellness in the country. One of our outlets is called Masculinity Africa. It's a show that airs on KTN every Wednesday night, but also we're on YouTube. It's Masculinity Africa with a Q. And of course, we're about to hit 10,000 subscribers. So subscribe and follow our content. We host different conversations around just thinking about the country and how we can, make it better.
Great. Yeah. And we are really proud of the good job that you're doing. I mean, for me, transformational change comes from the little things that everyone does. And when we all collectively bring our small efforts together, then we will have the change we want to see.
Definitely.
And what a time to have a conversation with you, because I appreciate a few things from the works that you're doing. Number one, intentionality. Number two, it is the precise details of what you do and how you do it and where do you drive these conversations. And let me tell you on air, it's something I really admire, and I have picked up from when we met and today. And Odongo, we are in saddening times, to say the least. I personally have gone through evenings where it is hard to even go to sleep because the pain is untouchable. It is unexplainable. It pierces through the core of who I am. And I believe most of us share in this space. We have had young heroes who now we call them heroes because of their bravery and the courage to go out and say, we want a better nation. We want a better country. And in that fight, we have lost some who we continue singing your names, and we pray and continue fighting that may justice be brought to your loved ones, and we will continue singing your names. But Odongo, what happens to these men of this nation? Where some of them have become victims of the fight to a better tomorrow and a better country, mentally, physically, the trauma, and they're left to deal with this. What happens to these men?
First of all, we often don't see extrajudicial executions as a gender issue, because almost 95% of people who are killed by the police are men. We don't think about it from a gender lens. When we think about gender-responsive initiatives, we think about sanitary towels in places of work. We think about childcare in places of work, which is fantastic. And this idea that it's either or is not something I believe in. I think we can chew gum and still walk. So we can still promote all these ideals that then, makes workplaces and spaces better for women. But also we can think about what else can we do so that we make spaces better for men. One of it is that majority of people who die in police custody, like Albert Ojwang, they're usually men. Majority last year's protest, out of the recorded 67, those are the formal numbers by the police, they were men. But like I mentioned to you, the tragedy is that often young men die in the hands of either fellow young men or older men, the police with a gun, And it's tragic because the fundamental problem I see with this idea is how the state doesn't see how by biting the right hand, you're denying the left hand an opportunity to grow. For example, Albert Ojwang is dead, killed because of a big man with a big title and a small ego was offended by his update on social media. They went and picked him from his home and killed him. But who have they made a young widow? It's a young woman. This young woman will raise a son. Statistics shows us that single parent households are 5 times more likely to be poorer than
when they have
both parents, And you imagine the economic burden that has on the entire society. So think about these 60 men who are killed. Think about the extrajudicial executions that happen across all the informal settlements where men are killed. These men are fathers. Think about the children they're leaving behind and how we are perpetuating a culture of poverty by letting these young women, often very young women, to take care of children, which then eventually, relegate them into places of poverty. So that for me is the first work we need to do as storytellers, is to tell this story and to not look at Rex Masai, or not to look at Albert Ojwang alone, but to look at the cost of his death and what it can do in the long-term, nature of that family and the country generally.
Yeah. As you speak, you're bringing out very fundamental points of view.
Yeah.
We are in a month and just coming towards the culmination of it, where we've been celebrating mental health, especially for men.
Yeah.
And as you say, when we all go to the battlefield, because I think since June 2024, it has been a national sensation. It's not men, it's not women. We have come together as a country. But if we really look at it from that perspective, we have the men in uniform gunning down young men of the nation.
Yeah.
And we've come a time where technology and social media is widely being used, and these stories have therefore been broadcasted more, and therefore it brings the question that when these social media tools and platforms are being used, there's some who receive a lot of backlash, and there is some that empathy is extended.
Yeah.
How does this work on the well-being of a typical average boy in this country?
Wendy, first of all, we are a country that hates knowledge. So we don't invest money in research. So we've not done longitudinal studies. We've not done studies to look at the impact of bullying on men. We know the impact of bullying on women, but we don't know the impact of bullying on men, know. And I don't want to sort of like give non-quantified statements about this thing. But what I've come to learn is that we've got to look at the online platform as an ecosystem. So for example, if Nairobi is being fed by water from the Ndakaini Dam, and you go and poison Ndakaini Dam, everybody who drinks that water in this city is likely to be poisoned. So if we poison the public sphere, which is within the social media spaces, and we make sure that it is mostly now about bullying and about name calling and about fat shaming and about all these things, we breed a community and a culture that then begins to cannibalize each other. So now it's men versus women, it is this versus this, it is the manosphere versus the feminist, while ultimately we should actually be thinking about how do we collaborate together to push this country forward, Like I told you, I think men receive bullying slightly differently. Like, for example, we always make fun of some presidential advisor. I don't want to mention his name. And we say, when once we have a revolution, we will, roast you. And of course, it's on a light note, But I think we don't imagine that, I think men have built this thick skin. And this thick skin is eventually what then sometimes makes them detach from their emotions. And when they detach from their emotions, then you see it in how they're leading. They're leading without empathy. They're leading without compassion. It's how loud they can bark. It's how fast they can crash dissent. And it begins by this. I wrote an article on my platform, danishodongo.africa, when I was just trying to analyze the death of Albert Ojwang, which is extremely tragic, the execution of Albert Ojwang. And I said, you can't be a man who is second in command. You have, you've been trained on anti-terror, bomb detonation. You've 25 years of experience. But then you're tipped off. I mean, you're completely thrown off balance by social media commentary. At that level, you need to be somebody with a thick skin, and so I say that the problem of this country is that we have too many men in positions of power and authority, and they're men who have fragile egos, unhealed traumas, and so that's how they are governing the country from their low self-esteem, and you see it in how they make bad decisions, either in how much they steal, how they crash dissent very hard. Like, for example, this young cop who shot at karaoke, was that really necessary? I mean, you find somebody selling a mask, and the first thing you want to do is to aim a riot gun at their head. What is it about you? It doesn't tell me something about the person who's been shot. It tells me something about you. That you are so insecure about yourself that the only way you can feel like a man is when you're wielding a weapon.
Exactly.
And you absolutely, you have gone through all the culturally sensitive rites of passages, but you still don't feel like man enough. And when we see how they kill young men, that violence, we see the violent end of it in men, but we see the violent, mild version of it in gender-based violence.
Yeah.
Because remember, if they are seeing an armed protesters as threats, think about how they will see a young woman you're dating who has said no to your advances.
That's very true. And I think when you bring the cultural point of view to it, when we try and look back to how men were being raised, even before social media was a thing, and for me, there's a very gray area, Odongo, between being a man and having a thick skin and being human, and men were brought up in the society that, you have to be strong because naturally men are providers, they are protectors. And especially in the African context, men were raised to be at the forefront, And I don't think they were told not to deal with their emotions, but they were told to deal with their emotions in a very powerful way. And then a time has come where people are really consuming a lot of social media. And who you are, your identity, and how you should deal with things is sort of a blueprint to it has been printed out, Just the other day, I was listening to some veterans in our industry who were talking about how, especially if you're in the public eye, you're number one, not allowed to not be okay. You're not allowed not to have your things figured out together. And so you go to school, study, you get a show. In this day and age, you're one video away from being a celebrity, quote unquote, and there are no financial structures that have been put in place, and you're in this limelight, you have this audience, you have 100,000 people following you, not understanding that your struggles are still there. So as we tell men to have a thick skin, where do we draw the line between it's okay for you to deal with your emotions? Because just the way you're saying, that gunshot was very unnecessary. And for me, it was more of you are trying to get every opportunity you have to exercise your power and tell us who you are and prove a point, But where do we draw the line between it's okay for you not to be okay, ask for help and deal with your emotions, and now you're a man, cry for up till 10 minutes, then you should be okay?
I think so that we make sense of this conversation, I want us to look at two factors. One is that we are living in a country that has a very brutal colonial history.
Yeah.
And this colonial history was mostly achieved through extreme violence, where the state weaponized, the state owns the monopoly of violence. It was the pre-colonial Kenya and the post-colonial Kenya. Because remember, when they came here, they looked at us as natives. And the biggest threats to their empire establishments were men. And remember, traditionally, men are the ones who went for war. And of course, there was a collaboration because women also sent in, support. And of course, we've had cultures like, for example, in West Africa, where women were actually the women kings. I mean, the women queens, and they were fighting and stuff like that. But let me talk about the Kenyan context, So we must understand that this colonial history is not very old. It is less than 100 years old. When the occupation happened and men were brutalized and they were taken to detention camps, and many of them were killed, Dedan Kimathis, and majority of them were completely dehumanized, and then they learned the language of violence. Even though Africa was, people were saying it was violent, but the nature of violence was mostly, an ethnic community versus this ethnic community fighting to either occupy and stuff like that, So I want us to see that, and that has continued through the police system, because then the curriculum, because Kiganjo that trains our policemen is a colonial relic, because remember, the police were trained initially at Kiganjo, pre-colonial Kenya, and the curriculum has not changed much. Even if you go to paramilitary or these armed forces, that really is it. It's to take men, beat humanity out of them, so that then when they come out, they are very violent and very stuff like that. So if that's the national language, how then do you tell a man to be weak when all around him weakness gets him killed? How do you tell a man to cry when all around him crying is a sign of weakness, and it will get him killed? So then they bottle it up, and eventually it explodes in many ways. We don't understand the cost of male grief, unresolved male grief. And grief is not just about death. It's grief from rejection. It's grief from violence. It's grief from all these things. And it's coming out in these things. I fundamentally, as the wellness tribe, what I believe in is that if we can get to just quantify the cost of male grief, we will reform our institutions, because it is at the heart of how we police, it's at the heart of how we govern, it's at the heart of how we do all these things. Then now, to bring the cultural aspect of it, the truth is that rites of passage are very important for any culture, It might be you building your Simba, it might be you getting a cat, it might be you getting married, it might be you doing all these things, But there's a concept I learned in school called the 3 R's, how to engage with culture. One, the first R is reject. There are harmful aspects of culture we need to reject. One of them is female genital mutilation. We are rejecting it, The second one is reform. There are certain cultures that are not bad, but we can reform them. For example, the female genital mutilation is something that is harmful, but there were lessons that cultures were learning through this very harmful rite of passage. So can we remove the harmful part of this rite of passage, but retain the beneficial part of it? Because we still need aunties talk to girls about womanhood and all these things. But can we do it without the cat? And then last but not least, there are those we retain. Retaining, there are those cultural aspects which are good for all of us, and we retain them, So I want to talk to the people who are custodians of male culture. So for example, in this rite of passage, whether you're Ma, whatever, can we infuse the ideas around mental health? Can we bring together ideas around, emotional awareness, not emotional vulnerability, but emotional awareness? Can we bring aspects around how do we make sure that when they leave this place, we've not just taught them how to be men, but we've taught them how to be men who are living in a world that is different from the world our grandfathers lived in? Because right now, Wendy, the truth of the matter is, you're a young man, you're going to get a girl who earns more than you. That's the truth, because she went to better schools. Maybe she got opportunities, and nowadays we see these writings on the paper advert. Female candidates are encouraged to apply. And you're seeing the growth of even income in this country. More women are earning more than men, especially in the formal economy, So you cannot continue to stick to traditional ideas that worked for your father, who lived in an era where women did not go to school, women did not have a voice, they were only pregnant barefoot in the kitchen. But now they are with you, they are hosting podcasts, they are flying planes, they are beautiful, they're doing makeup, and now you come with rugged ideas that, to be a man is this and that and that and that. But that can only happen when we begin to reform the traditional structures that make men. Because men are also very hierarchical. I cannot talk to an older man about certain things, but we can work with all these things. You see, the way women especially women who are doing cultural change around female genital mutilation, female education. They have what we call male champions, even in the Maa community. So they go and talk to these men who are older to talk to the younger Morans. I think now that strategy can work, where now we get men who understand the benefit of holistic well-being, and we get to infuse them in Kiganjo. We get to infuse them, they become champions in Kiganjo, in our communities of rites of passages, in our platforms. And hopefully then there'll be a snowball effect that trickles down to give us the country that we need, that is healthy, wholesome, but you're still a man. Because I also don't think that men need to be, overly emotional, so that then we say that, oh, now you are healthy. Yeah.
Wow, I love that. Reject, reform, retain. Odongo, let's digress a bit, because even as we have come at a time where we are being very vocal about men and the spaces that they're occupying and what mental health means for them, I like the explanation that you have brought about the governance and the systems that have been there pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial periods. Now, the Gen Z protests are not in isolation something new to this country.
Yeah.
And for those who did not know, protests have been there. And I've been in a space where you have literally said this with no flinch of doubt, Take us through how protests have been there and where we are right now, and the comparisons. What is the difference, and why is it a big sensation right now that the Gen Zs are going to the streets?
Yeah, I think what the broader thing I've been trying to say is that we should not lie to the Gen Zs that their movement or their fight for a better country is new. Because there's this terrible idea of blaming older generations, that if you fought for this country, we'd not be going to the streets. But there's a concept around this idea that the wheels of justice move slowly, but they grind thoroughly. The same way, the wheels of reforms move slowly, but there's actually progress, So at the beginning, 1950s, we have, the clamor for a new country. Independence happens, and it's mostly young people who are at the forefront. Tom Mboya is young. Jomo Kenyatta was much older. Jaramogi was much older. But then there was a collaboration between older men, older women, and younger men and younger women. We see the Mau Mau, which then eventually they go into the forest, and it begins. It wasn't even called Mau Mau. Actually, it's called the Kenya Land Freedom Army. That's the right name for it. The Kenya Land Freedom Army becomes, like an army of young people who have left World War II, and they've come back and say, by the way, we can actually beat these people, But then they also learn the skills around, guns and warfare and guerrilla and all these things, and they wage a war, And of course, many of us don't know that the Kenya Land Freedom Army killed more Africans than they killed more whites. The whites were very few, but majority of them were black people who were the victims of this army. But then, courtesy of that, plus the negotiations that happens in Lancaster, eventually we get, the prime minister, who then becomes, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, and the republic is born. But then the second part of the liberation begins. Not yet Uhuru. Not yet Uhuru now is that we said we'll give people land. We've not given them land. We've moved people who are displaced from, the White Islands. We've moved them to Kitale. We've moved them to Lamu. We've moved them to the Rift Valley, Molo, and all these things. But we've taken their land through land buying companies, which we've formed as the political class, so that we can buy all this land, And then it happens that there's a fight in parliament, eventually, Majimbo and all that happens. And that goes on until Jomo Kenyatta dies. And of course, Moi comes, and then Moi begins now the fight for, the multi-party democracy, which begins sometimes in the 80s. And it moves until 1992, when Moi gives in and says, okay, let's repeal Section 2A of the Katiba so that we allow multi-party. This fight were being done by young people, very young people. Let me give you multi-party democracy. One is Kepto Mbati. Kepto Mbati was a student. Tito Adungosi was a student at the University of Nairobi. There was, many young people who are just young. Mondawiro Mganga from Taita was the first student to actually, kukagua gwaredi la students who actually stood in and literally showed him that you're our president. And of course, Moi was pissed. And the Cyprian Nyamwamu, and many young people fought until we repealed Section 2A and we came back into multi-party democracy. That is progress. Remember, it starts 1963. We then consolidate the country and we become under one party rule, KANU. And then we realize that one party dictatorship is really terrible because we are not moving forward. We are crushing dissent. We have Nyayo torture chambers. And the fundamental rights of human beings are being violated. And then they fight for it. That's where Raila gets detained. Paddy Onyango gets detained. Wafula Buke gets detained. Wangari Maathai gets, abused. We have Martha Karua who walks in from president and the president calls her that she's a mad woman. And all these stories happen. We have Matiba who pays with his life, and we have Martin Shikuku and we have all these people. There were a group of young Kenyans from across the country, whether it was from the coast, from central Kenya, from the Rift Valley, from wherever. There were all these things, including Chelagat from the Rift Valley. So then after we get the multi-party democracy, we realize that, okay, now we have the multi-party democracy. But there is still a problem. And the problem is that power is centralized. The president owns the decision to decide which part of the country gets development. Exactly. And then he begins to use marginalization as a tool. So he says that, you guys from Nyanza, you don't support my government, you will not see roads, you will not see water, you will not see anything.
No development.
You guys from the coast, you guys from Northeastern, we will call you names and we will fight you and we will not give you a road until Kenya is almost 70 years old. And the fight continues, and that's when the fight for what we call the constitutional change movement begins. The constitutional change movement was done by people who are a collaboration of both young and old. There was Kivutha Kibwana, Professor Kivutha Kibwana, who was the chair. There was, Yashpal Gai, all these people. Yeah. And they participated, and eventually, 2005, we have a Wako draft. Eventually, we have Kilifi draft. And of course, the state wanted to still hold on to power. But eventually, the country decides that we don't want this Katiba. In 2005, yes and no, which birthed the Orange Democratic Movement as a party. Then eventually we become, we defeat that, but then the constitutional making process begins, and 2010 we promulgate a very progressive Katiba. That's where we are right now. It brings back devolution. It brings back the Bill of Rights. It completely changes how we arrest. So the rights of arrested persons. We talk about you cannot detain somebody for more than 48 hours before you present them into a court of law. So now when Gen Zs are being arrested and they cannot stay in the police cell for more than 48 hours before they are taken into the courts, it's because some people fought for it. There were young people who died to pay the price for that. Now if we're saying the things around, we don't need to get permission to protest. We just need to notify the police. It is a progressive constitution 2010 that eventually birthed that, and it was fought for by young people. So now my point is this. The final liberation that young people are fighting for is what we call economic liberation. Because we said that our problem in Kenya was that devolution was not working. So we brought devolution. It's made progress. But also we realized that, by the way, devolution has increased the cost of running this country. So we have 53% of the money that we collect. For every 1,000 shillings we collect, 530 bob goes into recurrent expenditure. You've not added the cost of the debt that we've accrued, especially during the Uhuru and Ruto first term from 2013 to 2022. We incurred extreme amount of debt, and now, now we realize that, okay, we've done all these things, but we still don't have the economic liberation. So the young people now are saying that devolution is nice, independent institutions are nice, it's good to have parliament and the Senate and the county assembly and all these things, but I want money in my pocket. I want money in my pocket. And so that is the long history of the struggle of the country. And moving forward, it will take a collaboration between generations, the old, the young, the middle, and the ones who are new, for us to move forward. Not a single generation can get this work done and work progress.
Okay. Odongo, this is a very fantastic and interesting conversation, and I love that. Even as I host, I am learning quite a lot. And I continue to stay at Speak Up Africa. We bring conversations that inform, engage, and empower. And for me, in this recent past, one thing that has stood out for me is the importance of civic education. I had a good friend of ours who sat right where you are and told us that the time the government deliberately removed civics from the education system, the problem began there. And as I was listening to you speak, the question that came to my mind is, what happened and where? Because it looks like there is a gap. There is a point in time where young people actively fought and were in the forefront, and then there's a generation that came in and bought into the fear of the government and of the system, and then now the generation that is there that we are calling the Gen Zs, who seem to be fearless and leaderless and all these kind of things, have come out and said, hatuogopi. If you want, eliminate all of us. But for me, I truly think there's a gap. There's a generation that bought into the fear of the government, and therefore when the Gen Zs have now come out and emerged on the streets, it sort of feels like it's a new thing. Allow me to just bring the digital point of view to it.
Yeah.
Social media and technology has made the world become one big village that has even affected like old media. Right now something happens, and as it happens, it's being broadcasted into different platforms. Has that sort of helped this generation to do things differently? Because as they are on mandamanos, they're now being live on different platforms, unlike olden days where newspapers would be bought off the market and people would not get information as is happening right now.
Hey, Wendy, I see it slightly differently.
Okay.
The challenge we have in this country is the ability to remember and to document. Did anybody live during Moi's time? Did people remember the darkness that was in this country in terms of the brutal nature of the special branch? Yet there were Kenyans who stood up against Moi, Reverend Timothy Njoya. There were Kenyans who used to print. Hopefully, our audience needs to read The Flame of Freedom, which is an autobiography about Raila Odinga and how they were printing papers, Remember, there was a guy called Piogama Pinto. Piogama Pinto lived during Kenyatta 1, and Kenyatta 1 was brutal. And Piogama Pinto ran a printing press, which was anti-government. So they've always been heroes. They've always been heroes across generations who defy authority, however brutal it is. And these are the people that I personally believe that God has given us to move humanity forward. They are risk takers, they are bold, they are courageous. This idea that now we have new people who don't fear the government is not true. There were people who did not fear the government. Remember, there was a guy called Muge. He died. Remember, there was Ndingi Mwana Anzeki, who was a bishop. He died. Remember, there was Bishop Korir, who hosted victims of post-election violence in Eldoret. And there were all these people and all these pockets of human beings. There was Mudhoni Nyanjiro, who stood up against the colonial government and was gunned down at Central Police Station. That was in 1922, before the country even became independent. So my point is this, that the civic education that we learned in school was a bad civic education. For example, you remember very well, I went to school and I was taught the benefits of colonialism. How was that good civic education? The things I'm telling you, I learned by reading books. For example, there are multiple libraries in this country that stock this type of books. Another thing, I also sit down with people who are part of the movement. There's a gentleman called Paddy Onyango who was tortured. I sit down with him and we talk, So to say that now there's a new generation of warriors and of people who are fighting is not to say the whole truth. It's just that they are fighting at a different landscape. Their landscape now is digital media. Their landscape now are their phones and their iPhones and their KFC and their high heels and their makeup tutorials. But then there was Dedan Kimathi, who literally went into the forest and fought in the forest. And then there was Raila Odinga, who now, even though has changed, literally stood against the government and was tortured and stayed for 13 years in detention. There was Afula Buke, who even though right now he's an old man, but stood against President Moi, who was brutal. Then we have so many people who have done these things. There was Ababu Namwamba, who even now is an MP, who's now a representative of High Commission. People forget that 2007, when the parliament was convened after elections had been rigged against, in the favor of Kibaki, it is Ababu Namwamba who stood up and said, I don't recognize you as my president. That was boldness. That was boldness. So I just want us to, I think we should not forget history, because the problem is that when the Gen Z revolution ends, they will also be erased, so that then we begin to exalt a new generation. This is Gen Alpha. But the correct history must be a thread which we follow through, all through and through and through and through. And I know this Gen Z that, it's nice for media and it's nice for pundits and it's nice for international community. But the truth of the matter is that they're just fighting a war that started a long, long time ago, and they're continuing with it till the very end.
Yeah. And I want us to try and consolidate our thoughts and now bring this conversation to pointers. Number one, I'm hearing you very loud and clearly. People, there's a big need for us to read, to understand tactics and strategies that have been there even before. Because then what happens to a people that are in unison but are leaderless? I mean, again, I have been in a space where you have shared very good thoughts that then what happens next? Because we cannot stand in ignorance over certain systems and measures that have been put to place to give directions and give governance. We want bad governance, but we cannot say we don't want governance altogether. So we have talked about how men have truly been affected, both in the workforce, when we are going to the streets, and how this has evolved over time. And as a people, generally, times have changed, and we've come to a place where this generation is tech savvy, and we are using digital tools to amplify our voices, and we feel like that really stands out for us. But there's also a history where young people have been in the front line for a very long time. So all these things come to this one boiling point. And my question is, has the government now failed us? When we try and say there's so much violence, there's police brutality, there's execution of young souls and people, if we compare it to the history that we are privileged to sit with you, that you have read, did those governments use different approaches in disciplining people and making people listen to them and hear them? And what we have right now?
It's actually, the truth of the matter is that it's become better. It's just that now it's broadcasted loudly.
All right.
But the violence of the state has always been part of the way to rule natives, especially in post-colonial countries. And this is not just a Kenyan problem. We see it in the US, we see it in sub-Saharan Africa, we see it in the Caribbean, we see it in countries like Brazil. Any country that has a colonial history will have a violent police force. And remember, colonialism is the tool that was used. Is used primarily to extract. So it enables capitalism. So as long as we have capitalism as a system that runs, we will have the police, who are people like they are the hoi polloi, but they're the hoi polloi with guns. But they are positioned in a way, they're less than 400,000 by the way, but they're the ones who've been placed between the bourgeoisie and the real hoi polloi. In between us here, there's armed forces. So we have the police, General Service Unit, we have the APs, we have the Kenya Wildlife Service, people who have guns, and then now we are introducing illegally a paramilitary thing called NYS, where you have all these young people who have been given paramilitary training. But the objective is so that these people are the ones who can protect the minority, who are less than 2,000, by the way, owners of capital, people who own thousands of acres of land, extract our land and continue to dehumanize us from the people who are down here, the majority of Kenyans, who are almost 50 million, from rising and saying that, oh, by the way, if we rise up, these people will not have anything to eat. So that's what's going on. And it's important that we understand these things so that then we know. Wendy, if you go to the hospital with a fever, and you're unwell, the first thing the doctors do is to do myriads of tests and to try to find out what is causing this. Is it a bacterial infection? Is it a viral infection? Before they give you medication. Now is the time for us to partner with Gen Z and the older generation, the younger generation, for us now to help the Gen Z contextualize the fight they are in and to give them context and nuance. The first thing we need to do is, one, and this is now for me bringing this home, one is to get off the high horse of idealism. It doesn't work. Fagia water will not work. You will not remove the entire over 3,000 MCAs who are elected. You will not remove over 290 members of parliament. You will not remove 47 governors, all of them, 47 senators. You will not remove a president if you don't have a plan. The plan is, one, how do people win elections in this country? People need to understand these things, and young people need to understand these things. People win political parties in this country first by belonging to political parties, but also having money. Because elections are expensive. Wendy, if today you want to vie for an MCA seat, say where I come from in Kobura Ward, you need about 3 million shillings. These 3 million shillings will go into actual work because there's a culture of handouts. So you have handouts, you have printing, you have agents, you have nomination certificate, you have merchandise, you have campaign. You need a campaign manager, you need communication, you need to have security. You need to know these things for you to stand a chance of winning elections. But the many times,
let me ask you.
Yeah.
So this this idea that we are trying to sing along to, that kwenye tumefika ni mtu na matendo. It's not about the money.
Yeah.
Are you trying to say that is far away from the reality?
That's the mistake many activists do. Activists think that people win elections because they have good ideas. People win elections because they have better strategies. And the strategy could just be to stand on the podium and dance. The strategy could be to visit the party leader and cook for him ugali in his kitchen and get him his favorite meal.
But Odongo, that is what we are saying we want to move away from. We are saying right now, Odongo is coming and you're presenting your case and you're telling us what exactly it is you can do for us. And we look at your track record. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the change that the young people are saying is, Odongo, we are moving away from the days of you need to be in the good books of Raila Amolo Odinga for you to get an ODM nomination ticket.
That is utopic, unrealistic, and will produce bad results.
Why?
Let me tell you, I've done sales and marketing. The biggest sales I closed, I did not close when I went to meet these people who are to sign my order in their offices. I closed these deals over dinner. I closed these deals eating nyama in Machakos. I closed these deals sometime in a bar. That's how the world works. The world works through networking, through charm, through, So it's not just enough that you have good ideas. But if your good ideas do not end up in parliament, how does it help anybody? What good is a paint if it's not applied on a wall?
But the people will see.
The people will see, but the people are fickle. Remember very well that human beings have a very short memory span. Part of the thing I'm going to do moving forward is to try to help people understand the human thing and the human being and how human makes decisions. Humans make decision first of all, by saying, okay, so this is now behavioral science. The behavioral science world says that people are more afraid to lose things than to gain things.
That's true.
So you coming with a good idea that I will help you gain and I will make this community better, blah, blah, blah. No, appeal to their selfish interest. Find out, tell them that, by the way, this person who is here is increasing taxes. That tax is taking 10 shillings from your pocket. 10 shillings from your pocket, you cannot go and eat your meat in the evening. You cannot drink your soda in the evening and cannot eat your meat. So you must understand how elections work. You must understand how politics work. You must understand the election cycle as a bare minimum as an activist. But if you go with your ideologies, and you think that because you have good ideas and you are incorruptible or because you stand and you are eloquent and that is enough to elect you. We have seen people who have been beaten. I can give you an example. I was at the university and with this guy from Western Kenya who was a typical village guy. running against a Nairobi guy. This Nairobi guy's poster was cool. He had a bevy of beautiful women and all these things. But that other guy from the village, Western Kenya, went underground. And when the elections results were, and I thought this was an urban guy, had better ideas because this school was urban, it was upper middle class type of people, and I thought they would resonate more with him. That other guy had done his work, he had done his research, he knew the audience, he knew their needs, he knew what he needed to do. When the results came, it was a bloodbath. That's when I learned that ideas must move from our head and we make them practical. So my point is this, and I know I'm blabbering, but I'm saying something that is very profound here, that people who have ideals must get off their high horse of ideals and come back to real life and find out how things work. How does the public service work? I did some work with Public Service Emerging Leaders Fellowship, which was a fellowship that took young civil servants who had been in the service for less than 2 years, but they were younger than 35, across all state departments for a 1-year mentorship program. And I spent time with government people. You want to know how memos are written as a young person. You want to know how government system works. You want to know how bureaucracy works. If you're not in that space, you will not change the public service, because the public service has its systems, has its structures, have its way. So you can criticize the public service from outside the public service, but the public service will continue to run, and they will pass, and they will have all these things that we hate, inefficiencies, blah, blah, blah. But unless we prepare young people to get into the public service to change it, change will not happen. We have to prepare young people to get into political leadership by preparing them adequately. Let them know how systems work. Let them know how to pay nomination fees. Let them know how to do posters. Let them know how to run campaigns. Let them know the language of politics. Tell them that, by the way, when you go to campaign, you don't talk about the things you will do. You talk about other things. You talk about how Wamama high, Warembo nice, and you win elections. Then when you go into parliament, then you bring your idealism on the table and you change things.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
You know how that moment when a bulb just goes on into your brain?
Yeah.
There are two things here. There's winning an election, and then there's good governance.
Thank you.
And there's the language that we speak during campaign, right into elections, and then you're in office, and then implement the, okay, great.
But if you just stick to your ideas and you don't follow the rules of campaigns, your ideas will stay outside. And what good are your ideas if they don't make it to parliament where laws are made?
True.
Yeah.
True.
I know you wonder why I know all these things, but I sit in so many spaces. I started my career first in the corporate world. That's in the circle movement. I went into the media, and then I left the media and got to the civil society space. Okay. When I got to the civil society space, I got enrolled into a program called Political Leadership and Governance Program. A 6-month political boot camp. I met so many people, and all these things I know are rooted in reality. 2022, I campaigned. I was the chief campaign manager of a governor in some part of this country. 2013 to 2017, I worked very closely with the Jubilee government as digital media strategies, and I wrote for them extensively. And I've done a lot of political work. So when I talk about these things, I sit in many places. One, civil society, I see the idealism and how they want to remove this entire system and get it all out, but they're not practical. And I also see how politicians are practical, they are brutal, they are conniving, they are planning, they will stay late. Me remember we used to have campaigns. Manze, we wake up at 4 a.m. We're on the road and we are having calls and you don't sleep. That's how you win elections.
Yeah.
So if we're going to beat must go, we have to organize ourselves. Identify a candidate, identify a party, identify a network of movements, of grassroots people we are going to engage. We have to build a structure that is just as effective as the structure of the person we want to beat. Because structures eventually trump strategy. You might have brilliant strategy, but if you don't know that Form 2A is signed like this, and this is how you take a photo, that you have a central database system where you receive that to collect your own data. If you don't know how elections are stolen, if you don't know how the people manning the voting booth play the role of stealing. If you don't know that agents are very key, if you don't know all these things, then your ideas are just good, and then these bad people will continue winning. And then we'll continue to blame ourselves. And that's how they love it.
I mean, for me, I believe change can happen, and a better tomorrow is sort of guaranteed if we put in place the structures that you're talking about. And young people right now, to whom much is given, much is expected. The same way we can use these social media tools and technology to advance certain campaigns, we can use the same tools to enlighten ourselves, to educate ourselves. And this is the only way we can beat the system at their own game.
Thank you.
So we have young men, and we are not discriminating the women, but for the purposes of this conversation, we have young men who have gone through different systems, who have generally gone through life, and they have the trauma. And now we are in a very volatile place where everyone is a soldier in their own rights, you know, and an activist, a freedom fighter. I want your last sentiments. Taking care of yourself as a man in this society. Times are really hard, you know, so much exposure on digital platforms. We want change, you know. How do you sum it up for them?
I sum it up. I once went to Dar es Salaam, and a pastor friend of mine asked me, have you ever boarded a flight? I said yes. When they talk about when the oxygen masks come down, even if you have a child, who do they say needs to put the oxygen mask first? It's you as an adult. He asked me, why do you think so? He told me that because you are not good to anybody dead. So these young people who are on the streets, you're not good to anybody dead. In the media, you know, we are told that there's no story that is worth your life. So it's easy to die for Kenya, but it's much harder to live for Kenya. I want to urge these men to live for Kenya. Self-care, take care of yourself, learn digital security, protect yourself, get to know what you need to do so that this fight needs to continue, because there's no point of us fighting for a better country when majority of us will not be there to enjoy it. Am I saying that we become cowardly? No. Am I saying that we become, you know, we don't go to the streets? No. I'm saying let's do all these things, but also care is possible so that then we are able to live, to take care of to live and see that day that we've been fighting for. Yeah.
Odongo, thank you so much. I feel like we've just taken a very small percentage of the wisdom and insight that you have. I pray that we will have more and more conversations with you right here on our podcast. So how do we interact with the other works that you do, the show that you have, as you give us your last parting shot?
So my name is just Danish Odongo. Danish has a double N across all social media platforms. I have a website, danish.africa. Go read my content. I do quite a bit of commentary there around all these things: masculinity, politics, urbanization, all these things. I am able to do many things. But also there's a channel we run called Manspective Africa. Manspective as a Q. By all means, subscribe to our channel. Let us know how we can interact. But also I do a lot of speaking engagement. So if you have like a group of people you want us to have a conversation with, if you're an organization looking for to help with strategy, from comms to policy, political strategy, how to engage, these are things that we do. And that's how we get to pay rent in this city. And that's how we get to, I can buy Wendy a drink and we sit down and we talk. And then I get to build my networks.
Great. Odongo, thank you so much for your honesty, for how candid you are, for how realistic you are, because very many people in these spaces try to camouflage behind idealism but run away from how real things should be. Thank you so much for coming to our podcast today. And it is the art of knowing what to reject, what to reform, and what to retain that will catapult you from one level to the other. Take your time and use the resources that you have to educate yourself. That is the only way to make yourself indispensable and as powerful as possible. And even as we continue the fight for a better tomorrow, let's use what we have to have the structures to be able to beat the system at their own game. Here at Speak Up Africa, we continue to bring you conversations that will engage, empower, and inform you. And we are so grateful for today's episode. Let us know, what did you pick out? What do you agree? How do you not agree with the perspectives that were brought in place? Because this is a community of people who come together to have conversations. And just as a reminder, the small deeds that you do will collectively bring a change to this nation. My name is Wendy Lois. I thank you for joining us today, and I will see you on our next episode. Kwaheri.